This is The Secret, How to Fight CPS and Win. I'm on with my co-host, Aaron Carranza. Aaron, are you there?
I'm here.
Now, we were talking earlier about questions from Facebook and questions that you had. Do you have a couple for me?
I do. I, like most people, don't know that or didn't know that CPS has their own inter-office communications with each other, where the monitor watches your visit, they, report back to the caseworker, the social worker, and if you have to go to trial, you're able to see all of those notes. So I was listening to a couple of callers say that they were being reported of having bad visits, and they knew they didn't have a bad visit. I know from firsthand that my visits were great. And my attorney said something about requesting the notes between the caseworkers and the monitors. So I was wondering if you can explain that more to our audience, because like I said, I was floored. I didn't know that you were privy to that kind of stuff.
Oh, yeah. There's something in all cases, and it's in a juvenile dependency case, CPS case, there's something called discovery. You and your attorney can always conduct discovery. And by discovery, that means you can ask for all notes, records, anything that the social worker has or had regarding your case. So if the social worker has an assistant who monitors your visits, you can be rest assured that that assistant is filing or writing a report and sending it back to the social worker. Now, what sometimes happens is, you feel and the monitor feels that your visits are great. But then when the social worker writes about it, it takes a different turn in the social worker's report to the judge. Now, most times the judge doesn't get to see the notes from the visitation assistant. In some counties, they do it automatically, but in a lot of counties, they don't do it at all. So unless you and your attorney ask for those notes, you're not going to be able to disprove what the social worker is saying.
Right.
I've been involved in cases where the social worker wrote in the report and got on the stand and said, Mom's visits were terrible. And I said, well, ma'am, ma'am, did you ever see any of the visits, face to face? No, I didn't. Well, how do you know that they were terrible? Well, that's what the monitor told me. The DCFS or CPS or HHS monitor who monitors Mom's visits, she wrote in a report that the visits were terrible. What she didn't realize, I don't think, is that we had copies of those reports, or you're able to get copies of those reports, and the reports in that particular case said that the mother's visits were great.
Right.
Right? Now, either the social worker got confused or something more sinister. I like to think the social worker was confused. They're overworked and underpaid.
So what happens then when you see that? You see that there's the monitor saying the visits are great, but the social worker is saying, something completely different. And then you find in the notes that, as a parent, your visits were great. What are your next steps then?
Well, my next steps are if the parent is going to have a hearing, I subpoena that visitation monitor to court. And I let the judge hear what the visitation monitor has to say, and then, the social worker is going to be confronted. But most county councils know if that happens, something's up, something went wrong, and then they're going to talk to the social worker and try to, prevent me from doing that by, saying, oh, that was a mistake, the visits between the mother and the child were actually great.
Right.
But I've been on cases where the parent tells me the visit was great, the monitor reports that the visit was terrible, and the social worker reports that the visitation was terrible. That's a harder thing to try to prove, right? Because you got the monitor who's saying the visits were bad. I've had people do this too, and I tell people all the time, don't do this unless you get permission. But they videotape, or record their visitation with the kid. In California,
Now,
that's a crime. But
right.
but people feel that they have to do this to prove that the social worker is lying.
Mm. Right. And then wasn't there a bill that just failed to be able to record your interactions with CPS?
Yeah, well, that may have been like a year or more ago, but it was relatively recent, where
Mm-hmm.
an assembly person in California proposed this law, and the law was that whenever you're interacting with CPS agents or social workers, as some people call them, that you could record them without their permission.
Right.
And that didn't pass. That's not the law in California. I just want to make that clear to everyone.
Yeah.
All right? Don't say Davis said it's legal to do, because it's not. All right? But in some situations, especially rough situations where, there's a lot of accusations going back and forth, I tell the social worker's attorney, and I have the client tell the social worker in writing, via email, hey, if you want to talk to me, great. I just want to let you know that because I'm concerned about your credibility and statements you've made that are false, I'm going to be recording all of our communications.
Mm-hmm.
So you put them on notice. And then if they don't want to talk to you because you are recording them, that's something that the judges going to have to address.
Right. You would think that if they had the best interest of the child, it wouldn't matter if you were being recorded or not. Like, if you're operating above board, it wouldn't matter if you're being recorded.
Well,
But if something shady's happening,
you might think that, but that's not necessarily true. I would
Mm-hmm.
believe that some people, social workers, honestly don't want to be recorded just for privacy concerns.
Mm-hmm.
That's why I think there needs to be a law in the books that says, hey, you can tape record or you can video record your social worker if, you're ever interacting with them, because there's always
Right.
going to be this he said, she said all the time. And
Mm-hmm.
usually when that happens in the law over years or, a decade or two, they make a law change and they say, okay, well, it's all right for you to uh, record, but they haven't done so yet. But I know that if they did allow that, a lot of these problems would be, shortcut, and it wouldn't be a problem.
Right.
A long
So we
time ago,
need to get people out there to vote on a bill to get that
yes.
happening. Right.
I was listening to a song, an old song from maybe the 80s or 90s, and there was a lyric in there that said, "You don't need the bullet if you have the ballot."
Right.
Right? So you don't need
Yep.
to resort to violence. You just vote. Go out and vote. I've been, I've been lax on this because I've been talking for, a couple of years about helping people organize from county to county, state to state, to vote in legislators that will make changes that will favor families instead of favoring CPS, to vote in judges that are going to help families instead of, perhaps, you know,
2 minutes.
being more favorable to the social worker. The people have the power of the vote. There was a woman, I forget her name, up in, I think, Contra Costa County in California, who actually caused the recall or caused the firing or retirement of two sitting judges in juvenile court. This was maybe 3, 4 years ago. And she did that by way of getting enough signatures to recall the judge, or these two particular judges. And
Mm-hmm.
once they qualified for the recall, it was going to be put on the ballot. The judges retired. And I think, someone told me, I don't know if this is accurate, that they retired because if they were recalled, it might have an economic impact on them or their retirement or something. So they just rather retired than facing the possibility of being, recalled. How embarrassing.
Right.
You know, you're
Right.
you're an elected official or appointed by the governor and you're recalled. So the
Yeah.
people have the power to vote. And we're going to be talking about that more in the future. Hey, Aaron, we got to take a break right now for
Okay.
some messages. We'll be back with more calls and more questions and more stories. This is The Secret: How to Fight Child Protective Services and Win.